Every year, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and the Lifestyle Medicine Foundation presents its highest and most valued awards. And that day, this gala day has arrived. Dr. Campbell, this evening, we have the distinctive honor and joy to applaud and to recognize the 2017 Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, Dr. T. Colin Campbell. Okay. This is the award. T. Colin Campbell, PhD, presented by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and the Lifestyle Medicine Foundation. Lifestyle Medicine Lifetime Achievement Award 2017. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This solitary voice recited America's health like this. Listen to it. We spend far more per capita than any other society. 2 out of 3 American adults are overweight, and every second adult either has diabetes or is developing diabetes. We fall prey to heart disease as often as we did 30 years ago. And the war on cancer, which began in 1970, has been a miserable failure. Half of all American adults have health problems requiring prescription drugs every week. And it continues. Very few American adults have ideal blood cholesterol levels below 160 points without medication. And to make matters worse, we are leading our youth down a path of chronic disease earlier and earlier in their lives. Every third child carries excess weight, and our kids now have a form of diabetes that used to be seen only in older adults. Children now take more prescription drugs than ever. And then, this man, this solitary voice that many people feel deserves the Nobel Prize. Then this solitary voice, as it recites our status of health, concludes, I can boil it down to 3 things: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The answer is pretty obvious, isn't it? It's the food. It's the food. And with a very clear voice and pen, this man, with highly respected research over the last 50, 60 years, in the laboratory and with population studies, both internationally and nationally, this iconoclast dispelled many of the myths about health and dispelled the misinformation by offering a concise message of hope, health, and healing. His whole life, particularly the last 20, 30 years, has focused on the idea that we need to move towards an optimal diet, a simple diet, largely of foods as grown. Now, as we all know, there's really ever any unity in knowing what an optimal diet is or should be. There's very little agreement there. But I think the consensus in the last 30 years has shown us that we're moving towards this kind of an optimal diet. This diet then is built on a wholesome, holistic concept that is not only focusing on taste and health recovery, but also on economy and sustainability, on ethics and compassion, on ecology and world hunger, and the effect of food production on climate change and planetary survival. It is a diet, an optimal diet then, is largely a diet that this man has coined, a diet consisting of whole foods and that should be plant-based. T. Colin Campbell. With this kind of an approach, he has led the charge in going beyond just treating the symptoms, managing symptoms of chronic diseases that are covered, that are taking actually 85, 86% of our total healthcare budget. This man has had a clear voice and had a sharp pencil, and he used it very effectively. But it began some time ago on a farm. Tell us a little bit about how this all began. Now, were you born in into a family of academicians? Were you born into a family of intellectuals? Tell us a little bit of an idea, give it an idea, where you actually come from.
Well, I basically was raised on a farm, as Dr. Diehl says. I actually was the first in my family to go to college. I came from a family, a loving family, a close family. My father only had a couple of years of formal education. He was an immigrant from Northern Ireland. And so my mother had a high school education. But my father was, I was close to my father. And with that, he wanted me to have an education. And he really, really worked hard being on the farm to make that happen. And so I, along the way, gained some friends, and some people just sort of came out of the woodwork at times to carry me along and get in school. But no, as far as my family was concerned, I don't think we would be called intellectuals and such, unless we can bend that definition a little bit. No, I've been blessed really by a good family background, a very dedicated father and mother, especially my father, just really, really insisting that I get an education.
So solid values.
Yeah, I remember him actually more than anything else through the years. One thing he told me that I treasured, and that was tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and the whole truth. And I heard that so many times, it became part of my genes, I guess, from him. So I owe him a great deal of gratitude.
It seems you have lived out that kind of a concept of ultimate integrity like very few people I know of. So I also understand that, didn't he drive you to your high school many, many miles every day?
Yes, we lived outside of Washington, D.C. on the farm. And I went to the local school, an elementary school. And when high school time came along, and that was the 8th grade, actually, at that time, the local high school didn't have a very high graduation rate who actually went to college. We were about 50 miles exactly west of Washington, D.C. And so he, working with his brother, got enough money to buy gas to drive me into school every day, 50 miles each way, 100 miles a day. And so he did that for a year. Then I got my license, and I continued to drive for the next 4 years, a total of 5 years, 100 miles a day to go to high school. And then come home, and anytime I had left, maybe do some work around the farm. So I tell that story because he was so dedicated for me to get an education.
That laid the foundation for you. So you went ultimately to Cornell, spent some time there, got your PhD degree there. You became involved in research activities, and you had a very career that began in the ivory halls of Cornell.
Well, first I went to undergraduate school at Penn State. Then I was given early admission to veterinary school. I didn't know for sure what I wanted to do, but When I was in my first year of veterinary school, my last year at Penn State, the equivalency, I received a telegram one day from a fairly famous professor at Cornell, Clive McKay, whose name I think you know.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't know this gentleman, but I got the telegram offering me a scholarship, a full scholarship, if I would leave veterinary school and come to Cornell.
He was a highly recognized celebrity in the area of nutrition, wasn't he?
He really was. He was a very significant person as far as the Adventist story was concerned with Ellen G. White, as you may know. I didn't know it at the time, but yes, Dr. McKay made it possible for me to do a master's. Then I took a year off. Thereafter, I got another letter from another professor at Cornell, come back, and they offered me the scholarship for my PhD. So I did that between 1956 and 61.
So you were on your way, you moved through the ranks, instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, and then you became a full professor at a fairly young age after having been there for 20 years. And then as you spent some time in the Philippines, you made an unexpected discovery as you worked with children, rich children, children of rich families. Tell us about this discovery, this unexpected finding.
Yeah, I should preface this, and I'm sure many of us know the story, but I did my doctoral dissertation actually on figuring out ways, with my professor at the time, figuring out ways to produce high-quality protein more efficiently. That meant animal-based protein.
No, wait a minute. So your initial orientation was to become more involved in finding more efficient ways to develop more animal protein.
Yes. My doctoral dissertation actually, being in animal nutrition specifically, with a biochemistry minor, my job was, in my thesis, was to work on a very novel technique of giving inorganic nitrogen to ruminants, if you will, to be technical, which who in turn could convert it maybe to protein. Because the animal protein was the thing to think about in those days, and that's what it was. I came away with my degree, really understanding that it's all about animal protein. I was raised on a dairy farm, so with my personal background, my graduate education, that's all I knew. It was basically animal protein should be at the center of the plate.
So that was your goal, to accomplish that more efficient production of animal protein. You have been a failure.
No, I've been a winner. No, that must be, sorry about that. Okay, there we go.
The opposition is kicking in here.
Yeah. That's probably a dairy industry calling me.
So what happened then in the Philippines?
Well, in any case, I then went to Virginia Tech.
Yes.
That was my first position. Again, working with a wonderful older gentleman, Charlie Engel at the time. And he had a contract through the State Department to go to the Philippines to organize a nationwide program of feeding malnourished children. And he asked me to come along to be the so-called coordinator of the entire project. It was a great start for early part in my career. And so we spent 10 years in the Philippines developing so-called mothercraft centers in order for these starving, malnourished children to get adequate nutrition. I'll never forget that. I need to mention that because I can never, ever forget those children. And that was really, again, it was a time when...
What do you remember about these children? Is it their looks?
Well, it was,
Is it their brown skin?
No.
Is there malnutrition status?
Yeah, it was either kwashiorkor or marasmus, as we would say in the technical world. Most of marasmus has inadequate consumption of calories. And I remember a couple of twin boys raised in the very early stages, 3.5 years old, who were weighing 12 and 14 pounds. And their mother was holding them, and that day that I was there, some food was being offered to one of the children, and she was taking a spoon, and the child didn't know how to even open the mouth to put the spoon in. I mean, it was, so I saw so much of that kind of thing. And the idea was then at that time in my community was to address the malnourished children problem in the world by making sure they got enough protein, good quality protein.
And what did you do?
That resonated with my background. It resonated with my senior at the time, Dr. Engel. And so that was the thing to do, is to go out and sort of make sure they got enough protein like we did in the West. But then I was out playing the golf one day with a medical advisor, my colleague who was a medical advisor to the president, President Marcos, actually. And he told me that he and some of his colleagues, surgeons at that, had operated on some children aged 4 and under for primary liver cancer. And that was another hat I was wearing, because in the Philippines we were working on this idea that liver cancer was caused by a certain chemical carcinogen called aflatoxin.
Aflatoxin, yeah.
And that was the thing, you know, carcinogens, they cause human cancer, et cetera. But he told me about these children. I couldn't quite believe that. I hadn't heard such a thing, because liver cancer occurs in older people, of course. And I doubted it, but then at the same time I saw another report, rather unrecognized journal at the time, that indicated maybe there's something to this. And with the responsibility of offering these children more protein.
Yes. So
And
these
then
were...
what I learned is in my nutrition sort of area of work, I got the impression that these children that occurred most likely came from the families consuming the most protein. So here was a problem. You know, it seemed like to me that higher protein might cause cancer, which kind of
didn't quite fit the picture or your
didn't quite
background,
fit the
did it?
picture. So I came home and got a research project from NIH that continued for the next 27 years. It was renewed a number of times.
So that set you up on a different...
Well, it took me at least 2 or 3 or 4 years to really believe that there's something here to this. The job was to just ask the question, very simple question: does protein cause increase in liver cancer? And so we used experimental animal studies at the time, which was traditional. And this chart that's shown up here, I guess, that was really a key observation. It turned out to be extraordinary. I was also teaching at the time biochemistry and later nutritional biochemistry, and using textbooks and that sort of thing. And I started seeing some things, you know, in the textbooks I couldn't quite go along with. It seemed like every time we did some research, it didn't quite square with what we thought it knew. This observation here was probably the most significant thing that really got me thinking.
Landmark development here.
Kind of a landmark thing. And we really wanted to see if in the first 12 weeks, in a cancer model, if you will, what would happen with respect to high protein, low protein. High protein being 20% of total calories, which is equivalent on the high side for humans too. That dotted line there is, in fact, when the animals are mutated, you get a genetic mutation, and then given 20% protein during the next 12 weeks, the cancer grew well, as you can see in the dotted line.
So these rats in this study, right?
That's right.
They already had the cancer that was introduced.
Mutation, that's right.
Okay, and then the growth of the trajectory of the cancer growth was determined by the amount of animal protein?
That's right, in the diet.
So
diet. We fed the 20% for the first 3 weeks, going along that dotted line, if you will. Then we switched the diet down to 5% and turned the cancer off. And then turned to 20%, turned it on, and turned it off. And that, for me, was striking. Other research we had done showed that the protein effect was so prominent that those fed 20% less for a lifetime, they all died from liver cancer. The ones fed 5%, none did.
So you could turn it off and on?
Yes.
Now, this is protein coming from animal sources. Did you do the experiment with vegetable?
Yes. The protein we were using was, of all things, casein, which is the main protein of cow's milk. Not exactly squaring with what I had been told. And so the plant protein did not do that, and that was the second observation. And subsequently after that, there were so many things that came up, and it really didn't have to do with trying to understand cancer in rats, if you will. They were actually principles. Most of my research, I was really interested in principles because what I was seeing in the textbooks and a number of different scores, kind of mechanisms and this and that, it just, this thing here and subsequent studies just got me to be a believer.
So you became very concerned that perhaps the traditional approach that animal protein is the way to go to provide better health,
right?
Whether it's in the Philippines or in this country here,
right.
There may be some skepticism developing now, right?
Yeah.
Especially with regard to casein, one of the larger portion of the protein in milk, right?
Right.
And so you began to express yourself with voice and pen, and you became involved in one of the big projects that in 1982, is that right?
Right.
Evolved into the first major report on the relationship between diet and cancer.
Correct.
Coming out of the National Academy of Sciences?
Correct. I was on I was invited, Senator McGovern, as you may know, came out with a report in 1977 from Pritikin's work, actually, suggesting that high-fat diets should be reduced, gotten in a lot of political trouble with that, and then after that, the National Academy wanted to know about, what this might mean for cancer. I was invited to be one of the 13 members on the panel. I was only one of two who actually was doing research in this area. And so my interest, as we put that report together, was I wanted to have a chapter in protein. No one wanted to hear about protein, but I kept insisting with my colleagues. I said, we got to have a chapter on protein. They finally consented very kindly, and I put a chapter in, and that got me labeled.
No, I think it's very interesting that the correlation between fats and cancer was a very solid one, similar to the relationship and correlation between animal protein and certain diseases, in this case cancer. We had opted then for the fat correlation, and you said, you have the similar relationship here also for animal protein.
Right.
And so you became a crusader. You did. And you began to endear yourself to many different food powers, didn't you?
You're saying very kindly.
Okay. So let's take a look at this here. I've summarized one of your statements. When I began my experimental research program on the effect of nutrition on cancer and other disease, I assumed, you said, that it was healthy to eat plenty of meat, milk, and eggs. And then the change came, the Damascus experience, right? And you said, but our evidence raised questions about some of my most cherished beliefs and practices. Our findings published in top peer-reviewed journals pointed away from meat and milk as the building blocks of a healthy diet and towards whole plant-based foods with little or no added oil, sugar, and salt. A paradigm shift in your thinking, a paradigm shift in the emphasis that you became a champion of from that time on. And you began involved in lecturing, in writing. You wrote books, you wrote articles. You had some 300 scientific articles published. You became involved in writing documents like animal protein, meat, fish, dairy, and eggs, causes of cancer. And you said casein is the most relevant cancer promoter ever discovered. I heard you say that. I heard you say that.
I'll say it again.
Perhaps the most... Perhaps one of the most carcinogenic element in the diet. And in the process, you were not very well becoming the fair-haired favorite of the milk industry, the dairy industry, of course, the meat industry, and the egg industry. And although years later now, just 2 or 3 years ago, the World Health Organization said exactly this, that there's a direct relationship, not just an association, but a direct causal relationship between the amount of processed red meat consumed and certain cancers, in this case, colon cancer, right? So
Yep.
you were rehabilitated in a sense. It came a little late, but you see, in the yeah, go ahead.
I want to say one thing about that chart we just shown. I'm focusing on protein. In that
Yes.
case, that was a chart of Professor Colin Campbell at Western
Correct.
Ontario,
Yeah.
who talked about fat. But shortly before he passed, he gave me permission to reinterpret his data.
I see.
And
That's
that
good.
really wasn't saturated fat.
So this is the
It's animal food. Well, that's a linear regression for animal protein. It's not just the protein too, because I got to put this in here.
Yes.
When we choose to eat animal protein for whatever reason, and we've done it for decades and even more than a century, when we choose to do that, we're changing the entire diet.
Yes,
So when you see that kind of correlation, it's not just the animal protein,
yes.
it's the displacement of plant foods in order to achieve that consumption.
That's a very important
So
point.
that's a total diet.
So you're making more room now. By leaving animal products out, you're making more room for plant foods in
Right,
general.
right.
So you're beginning now to talk about a symphony of nutrients rather than some micronutrients, but rather than the totality of the diet, not just focusing on 2 or 3 items.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Yes. I really became quite fascinated with that idea that was another challenge for our field of nutrition, which is,
So then you come to the big developments in China, the China study. Give us a little bit of an idea. Now, this is the 1970 plus. The ice is melting between 2 powers. China is on the rise. Nixon is developing ping-pong diplomacy with Kissinger. And how in the world did you get involved in this relationship?
well, first off, the most senior scientists from China at the time who came to the United States came to work in my laboratory. And I learned from him that the Chinese had established an atlas of cancer mortality rates for the country, showing that for different cancers, there was very high in some areas, very low. And so he and I said, why don't we go and let's do a joint project? And at that time, there was no research work between the United States and China. So we had to work on that a couple of years. But we got the funding from the National Institutes of Health. We also got the cooperation of the Chinese government at fairly high levels. And that's quite a story.
How does this work? Didn't you have to go through the CIA? Wasn't there some security measures? I mean, we were on adversarial terms
Right.
then.
Yeah, one day, we're getting organized, and it seemed like every day we had a challenge. But in any case, one day there was a knock on my office door, and the man walked in, and he pulled out of his vest pocket a card. And it had just a single name on it. It says Emil Vinograd. Emil Vinograd. I can never forget that name. There was nothing else on the card. He said, I represent the Central Intelligence Agency. He was the number 3 guy, I guess, in the agency. And so he wanted to know, and I had been to China already on a fellowship that was an NIH fellowship. And he wanted to know, he said, I understand you've been to China. What did you do? And I sort of told him where I went. And I knew I should answer honestly. There was no other way to do that. I was a little skeptical of talking with the CIA, but he reminded me we wouldn't get the grant unless, that they had the last say whether we're going to get that grant. And so in reality, after I told him, he pulled a little black book out of his vest pocket and said he knew every place I had gone in China before I even told him. So then he was happy. Then the CIA was pleased with this. They passed on it. But then the same thing happened in China, and that went on for 8 months.
Oh my.
The senior intelligence agent in China. There's a lot more to this story than just that, but it really was an interesting time.
Major accomplishment to get through all these bureaucratic channels then, right, of
Yeah.
security, passing
This turned out
safety.
to be the first project between the United States and China. And then we were actually awarded, after 20 years, the first place prize out of 111 entries as the most important work in China.
Did you all hear
for a
this?
20-year period. So,
First prize coming from China.
yeah, this came from China. They were giving out this.
How many years? Yes, that's right. Give us just in a nutshell, how many people were involved in this observational study, in this?
Sure. I should say I was joined by some colleagues who were invaluable. Sir Richard Peto and Sir Richard Diehl and Oxford University, as well as my Chinese colleagues, of course. And
So you had several countries really involved and several universities.
yeah, eventually I had 4 countries involved. One, I should say it this way. I had 24 laboratories from around the world that we sought out to analyze various and sundry things. 24 countries and a total, 24 laboratories, I'm sorry, in 6 different countries. I got it right. 24 laboratories, 6 different countries. So it became a big project. And the Chinese themselves were extraordinarily good workers. And so I had access to about 260-some barefoot doctors and other people who went around to a total of 130 villages across China. And we collected blood, urine questionnaires, food, analyzed that. We had access to all the disease rates from China on, from cancer on through several other diseases. So it was a big study. It was 6,500 families that we very carefully collected information on.
So you looked for some correlations between
Yes.
diet and cancer rates,
Right.
because cancer rates in some areas were sometimes 100-fold higher than in
That's
other
right.
areas.
That's right, even 400-fold in the case of esophageal cancer. But yeah, the differences between the high rates and low rates were far, far greater than we see here in the West. And what made the whole thing really interesting, I think, was the fact that when we picked out these counties around China, they were rural areas. And we learned that 94% of our respondents in that survey, total 6,500 people, they were born, 94% were born in the county in which they were then living. So it had been a very stable population.
So this was not genetic differences.
No, no, probably not. We measured lots of things, blood, urine, and all this questionnaire information. And then we had these 24 laboratories from around the world analyzing various sundry things, from viruses to different kinds of nutrients, to hormones, to fatty acids, to all sorts of things. And I was really interested in the China study, not because it was an end result. We would learn that. I was interested because the work we had been doing in the laboratory at that time was still so provocative. I wanted to know what this might look like in a population, who would live that lifestyle for their lifetime. And that was the purpose of the study, which is compare the Chinese data with the laboratory data. And it kind of worked out pretty nicely.
I remember my astonishment when I was used to American normal cholesterol levels. In those days, when I went to school, we considered up to 300 to be normal cholesterol acceptable levels. And then when you went to China, you came back with results that were in a totally different range.
Yeah, our range, the U.S. range, more or less at that time, was a low of an average of, let's say, 170 to a high of about 300, you're correct. That was the Western range. We had cholesterol values on average of 127. And in the Western literature, that was said to be in the territory with a higher rate of suicides and more colon cancer.
Yeah.
It was kind of ridiculous, but I know Bill Costelli at
Yes.
Birmingham study. I talked to him about it, and no one had seen anything like this low, and I was doubtful myself, and so we went back and did it 2 more times and 2 more laboratories, and it was really low.
I was suspicious too when I saw ranges from 88 to about 140.
That's right.
Something like this, right?
They're
An
high,
average
they're
of about
low.
120 something, right?
Yeah.
So totally different values for a country where you couldn't find heart disease. This was the normal, this was the ideal for these countries. For ours, where every second person then was dying from heart disease, we considered to be 170, 250 to be sort of the normal range, right?
Well, the general recommendation was don't go below 160.
That
You
was
had
dangerous.
You had a higher risk for suicides and colon cancer. Sorry.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. And so you and your son, a young physician now, wrote the book, The China Study, 2005, became a bestseller. You used a small company, a publisher, that did very, very well with your book, right? And has since then published other books of yours. How many million copies do you think you have in distribution? In how many languages, the China Study?
It's nearing 3 million copies.
3 million.
And has been translated to more than 50 foreign languages.
Okay. So you are building your reputation as an iconoclast. You are a disruptor, aren't you? And then you team up with our dear friend Dr. Esselstyn, and then Hollywood kicks in and makes Forks Over Knives, which for the last 5 years has become the most well-received and most popular documentary ever produced in 5 years solid. And you wrote the book Whole, because here again you were very concerned about developing more of a holistic concept, not the reductionistic concept, talking about the importance of looking at the total symphony of nutrients, right? And then your son, with your help, wrote the book The Campbell Plan, and then came the pushback, right?
Yes. Let me add one point here. I had the laboratory research. We did the China research. There was a little filler in between that became very important.
A filler?
A filler of information.
I see, okay.
That's when I got a call from Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. McDougall.
I see.
And then I learned about Dr. Ornish. So I want to pay tribute to my friends.
So that developed a friendship with another man that grew up on the farm, right? Okay.
It was a combination. Here's the laboratory work of what they had done with people to reverse disease and so forth, treat people, and then we just kind of fit in together.
So you bring the research that you represent and the clinical experience together, right?
Exactly.
And so then comes the pushback, and in the process, it's becoming very obvious you did not really endear yourself to the dairy industry.
Right.
You didn't endear yourself to the meat industry. You didn't endear yourself to the egg industry. And the pushback came. How did you really handle the criticism that came? And was there a lot of criticism coming to you? What kind of criticism? Was it an open dialogue? Was it subtle? Tell us a little bit about what you, as a scientist, experienced that followed the honest understanding and the discoveries that you made.
It's been a 40-year experience, I should say.
A 40-year experience?
It's never stopped. But in any case, it started with the National Academy of Science report, which at the time was the most sought-after report in the history of the Academy. So it got a lot of attention. And I, unfortunately, became sort of the face of it in a sense because, at least in my community, because I was the one giving testimony before congressional committees and that sort of thing, especially with my interest in protein. That idea of talking about animal protein was a serious, serious problem. And so after that, I mean, there were things, I'll just mention a couple. There was a petition to have me thrown out of my society. It was very formal.
What kind of society was that?
That was my professional society, the American Institute of Nutrition. And at that time...
Because you were taking a stand on research that you had conducted with NIH funding?
Yeah, the charge was that I had betrayed my own science, nutritional science. And so there was a hearing in Washington, and that was quite a deal. And there were other things, attempts to have me thrown out of Cornell. I had tenure. And a whole variety of things. I don't feel like going into them here. But I did experience what you had there a moment ago, what goes on behind the curtain. I could feel, I mean, we were crossing some thresholds that I didn't.
So after 40 years of experiencing the experience in a pressure cooker of largely really not well-deserved criticism, you then began to write the China study, the updated version. It's showing up in a blue cover now with your son. And why did you write this? And how is this different from the first edition? What have you added to it?
Well, the publisher really wanted us to do this.
This was 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, in 2016. He really wanted us to do this. We didn't have a lot to update. We went through it, Tom and I did, and we didn't find anything we would really seriously change, but we added a little bit to it. We added an extra chapter on one of the segments of our society who, in my view, is chiefly responsible for the misinformation. And that group, that segment of our society that I'm holding accountable for this, Just when I'm starting to say something important, Gary just called me again.
There seems to be a trend emerging here.
I'm used to this. I forget what I was going to say here.
You had a lot of criticism coming your way that was undeserved, that was largely political in nature, because you were really attacking a very powerful lobby group system. The economy was really under attack by the findings that you made.
Yeah, I mean, I realized that, we're raising some pretty serious questions for a number of different industries in our society. I forgot what I was going to say. That book, I added one additional chapter in there in this case. The first version, we dealt with questions concerning what's the role of industry in this misinformation? What's the role of government? What's the role of big medicine? What's the role, the usual kinds of things we think about. And I left out one group in the first book. I didn't quite have the nerve to do that at the time.
The academic community?
Yeah.
Really?
The institution is mostly responsible for the lack of information getting out to the public about this is the academic community, my community. And so...
That's where you entertain free market ideas, isn't it? Where you search for answers.
I'm writing another book now, and about 2/3 of the way through it, I'm telling that you had it on there before with a possible title called Behind the Curtain, because I'm going to be discussing, in fact, I already have, we've finished that part of it, talking about, the kind of experiences that I had. I'm not complaining. In fact, I really thank those people who did that. Oh. Because they illustrated for me the kind of power that exists in our country. And it's been that way for a long time. It's evolved from the 1800s. And it's kind of a fascinating story. But I think the public needs to address this, be aware of what this is, because I'm quite certain that most of the public do not know.
So you're taking us behind the curtain of the political events. Are you increasing your life insurance premiums? I mean, this is pretty serious, isn't it?
Well, I didn't take it seriously. 4 times I've been offered 24/7 protection, but I can't worry about that because, I don't believe it, to be honest about it. But, just...
As we see a lovely lady here, the wife of how many years now?
56.
56 years. A little bit of a more intimate aspect of your lives, if that's okay.
That's okay.
You had a long marriage. You stood by your man in times of adversity and in times of acclaim.
Right.
How did you folks meet?
We met in a little research lab in Herndon, Virginia. He came there after he finished his PhD, and he came and worked there, and I was a secretary there.
So you had a working relationship?
Sort of.
Oh, did some of the sparks sort of begin to emerge?
For him it did, but I didn't like him.
You were always a man that would take initiatives. So, and then what happened next? Let me show you. There was that kiss, and then you see the results. How many children do you have?
5.
5 children?
Right.
How many grandchildren?
11. Yeah. And they all eat this way, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you were oftentimes by yourself because your husband was involved in traveling research projects and so on. 4 children, 5 children?
5, yeah.
Did you have a nanny to help you?
Oh my gosh, no.
No?
No, I wouldn't want one anyway. I love the job. Right. I wouldn't want a nanny, no. They're all mine, right?
Folks, here you meet a very special lady, a lady that did what needed to be done She did it with bravura. She did it in style. She did it in a very humble manner. It's sometimes not easy to be a well-recognized person, and then you know that it really takes two people, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
But you take the high road, and you do and accept what comes to you. So we want to honor you. We want to recognize you too. We want to kind of feel that this award comes to both of you today.
Thank you. Thank you.
We recognize you as a stalwart companion. We recognize you as a soulmate. We recognize you as a partner fully deserving of the special recognition that we give you today.
Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us, as we conclude, let us salute one of the true giants in the field of health, science, and nutrition, to whom integrity and honesty, unbiased and unaltered truth found its proper place on the top shelf of lasting values.
Yeah.
Please sit down. You know, we always have a little bit of a special item at the end of our interviews, and last time we had Dr. Esselstyn showing his special celebration of the gold medal race in Melbourne in 1956. With Dean Ornish, we had him featured here as, but very few people knew, as a musician that could sing ballads and accompany himself by the guitar. And I thought, what am I going to do today? So what I want to do is I want to read something to you. Ode to Colin Campbell. Every once in a while, a person's life is so good, the vision so clear, the ambition so pure, the contribution so unique, the insight so profoundly important, the understanding so clear, the argument so compelling, the logic so disarming, the integrity so rare, the conclusions so startling, and then the writing so superb, the encouragement so genuine, the deportment so humble, the concern for others without guile, the life lived without falsehood.
Can I say something? Can I say something? The signature at the end of this, who did this so generously, is Hans Diehl.
No. That was not in the script.
Well, that's okay.
But I also want to tell you something else that was not in the script. You came to me earlier and you said something about your husband's walking with a cane.
Right.
What was that all about?
Well, I want people to know what happened to him. It's not his diet, right? Right. He was playing racquetball with our grandson, who's 6'4", and another grandson, which is 6 feet, and our youngest son. And he fell and cracked his hip. And then he had an operation. The doctor he came in and said he's going to put 3 pins in, 3 screws, he said. And so he came back out and he said he put 4 screws in because his bones were so good and they could tighten them up. And so he did really well after that, but then like a real dummy, he started running. He started running before the muscles in the leg was well enough to run. So that's what's happened right now.
The diet actually helped him then, didn't it?
Of course,
That's
of
how much the
course.
dairy guy said.
Yeah.
Oh, that was from the Dairy Council?
Well,
Well, I told the doctor.
yeah, tell that.
Yeah, when the doctor told me his bones was his bones was really well, hard. I said, well, you know why, don't you? And he said, why? I said, because he doesn't use any dairy. Yeah.
Well, let us conclude as a group here our special recognition of your life as a couple, and in particular, your life. You have lived such a life that the lives of countless others are blessed. And the world has become a better place simply because you have walked through it. Ladies and gentlemen, our hearts today are filled with great joy, and we feel privileged and proud to honor and celebrate the life of such a very special person, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, 2017 Lifetime Achievement Award, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and the Lifestyle Medicine Foundation, Indianapolis, Indiana. October 23, 2018, Gala, the American group, the international group, we all recognize the special life that you have lived. Thank you.
Thank you.